seems to be a difficult one for for most people that I know. It's just like a very difficult one, especially certain teachers who shall remain nameless, who have committed actual criminal acts, and still seem to have tremendous realization.
You see, another way to look at this is if you can forgive the inner person of the guru for being there and put up with the peripheral kind of issues that come up around teachers, observing teachers' preferences and the things that give them away as being a person, that they may get angry, they may be impatient, right? They may overeat, they may like sex a lot, or they may hate sex, whatever the personal propensity of the teacher is. If the aspirant can know from the beginning there's a person there and then forgive it, then that allows them to forgive their own ego, you see, and enter into real communion with the divine aspect of the teacher. So it's a powerful technique of forgiveness, because no one's going to ever get this stainless teacher that they think exists. They may look stainless from a distance, but when you get into the inner circles of these teachers, you find out that they're not as stainless as one thinks, and nor should they be. This is what I'm saying, that this is an erroneous spiritual understanding from the beginning. It actually originates from Judeo-Christian Islamic ideas of spirituality and their notions of perfection, notions of holiness and all that stuff. Although certainly we see it in India and other countries.
In a way, it seems to me it's kind of like a relief, because it's like, well, I can still be realized and have those apparent imperfections too.
Oh, you will. Not can.
Well, I mean, it's been presented. It's like you have to be totally, this way, you can't have any desires, and you can't have this, and you can't have that. Otherwise, there's no way that you could ever get realized.
See, instead of listening, just accepting something like that when it's spoken to you, it's best to deconstruct it and seek out the angry person in back of that who's saying that. Who could be so angry and self-righteous as if to say, there is no person, there is no ego. That's an angry, distorted mind functioning. So life is full of tricks, life is full of risks, life is full of danger. Everywhere, just crossing the street. So of course it's going to be there when you sit in front of a teacher. The key for the teacher is to dwell completely on consciousness. Dwell completely on the absolute. That's where the perfection is. But the aspirants won't help but notice that there are preferences functioning in the enlightened one. There's no question about that. Right? The Jnani should not be ashamed of that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Certain great avatars, they've been attached to blankets, and they've been attached to certain caves that they sit in. They're attached to certain kinds of food. That's all ego-based. It's just that those desires no longer impinge upon the self. The self stays fully mastered in that individual. That there's a trans-individual presence functioning in that enlightened being, which never goes away, which is omnipresent, eternal.
I'd say my comment is that it sort of demonstrates a lack of compassion and love for the humanness to want your teachers to be perfect and pristine and not human, basically. And so it's like that love of that quality that makes them human is that compassion for that. And then the compassion for your own self, what makes your own self human. And that's so divine. I mean, that's sort of the divine that creates the humanness too, the desires and everything.
But you can see how people can develop an overly fond fascination with the impersonal. That looks safe.
It's a rejection of
It's a rejection of the human structure inside.
Mhm.
And many Indian saints will take on that posture of having eradicated most of their personalities so that, it's a cultural thing, so that they can be recognized as that spiritual teacher, so that they'll feed that illusion. They'll give the impression that the body doesn't exist and the world doesn't exist, desires don't exist. They communicate that to feed the illusion of self-transcending grandiosity, that they've attained this state of super grandiose spiritual realization where desire is totally dead or just about totally dead in them. And that's supposed to impress the listener. That's supposed to impress the people who come and sit before him so that they can think more of him than just being a human being. But if you understand what the self is, and if you suspect someone is realized in it, then that should be enough to make you adore who they are in the spiritual sense, regardless of how they behave. The self should be felt as Shakti, as power. And it's the communion with that power between the aspirant and the master that produces realization. That's how it is passed on. You can feel that Shakti now. Yeah. That Shakti is completely outside of individuality. Please listen to what I'm saying. I said that the ego and the desire system continue to remain intact. They remain intact. Desires and ego and personality, identification, all of that remains intact. Perception. But that is not what the divine is. The divine is that which is most primal, most primordially present in awareness. The divine is awareness itself without name and without form. But it is extremely generous in its spirit in that the human personality may be allowed to float within it. And there may be times when consciousness, because of great realization, may swallow the whole relative personality for brief seconds or longer periods of duration, when the whole room will be seething in blissful current and divine light. And it's as if the personal body-mind and the ego and the senses don't exist. Only that exists, and that is legitimate, and that is beautiful, and that is true. But later on, a desire system will return. Typically, it returns. Typically, in human existence, it continues to function after realization, during realization, before realization, within realization. So that realization and non-realization merge. So that at some point, nirvana and samsara climax together in the same intensity. And in that fullness, then there is absolute perfection, when the transparency of consciousness permeates the samsaric realm. And when samsara is itself liberation. Not samsara as separate from nirvana, but samsara as a wave of the nirvanic bliss, the para-nirvanic bliss.